Charles Walter Dryden, born September 16th, 1920, in New York City.
And where were you, or what do you remember about when you heard that the United States had been attacked at Pearl Harbor?
On that day, well, I had to back up just a little bit. I had begun flight training at Tuskegee Airman Flight School on August 19th, 1941. The program consisted of 3 phases: the primary, the basic, and the advanced phase, each of which lasted about 10 weeks, a total of about 8 months. Okay. On Pearl Harbor Day, or a week before it, my classmates and I had completed the primary phase. There were 11 of us. We were in the second class that went through flight training. The first class began on August 19th, 1941, before Pearl Harbor. And similarly, my class started on August 19th, 1941, about 3 months before Pearl Harbor. So by that time, my class had been whittled down from 11 starting to 4 who completed the primary phase. So the 4 of us had been given 10 days of leave to go home and celebrate and show off and all that with our uniform and so forth. We still have a war going on. Well, while I was in New York, my girlfriend and I went to visit her brother at a hospital in Staten Island, on a ferry across the narrows of New York City's waterfront. On our way home, after we'd visited her brother, we were riding on a shuttle bus from the hospital to the ferry. And while riding the bus, I was standing, of course, in uniform. My girlfriend was sitting. And one of the other ladies on the bus said, "Soldier, do you know that we're at war?" No, I didn't. Well, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor today. I didn't have any idea where Pearl Harbor was. And she said, "You better report to your station." So my girlfriend and I continued to her home in the Bronx and found her family huddled around the radio listening to the reports about the attack on Pearl Harbor. And her father said, "Charlie, do you think you're going to have to return back to Tuskegee right away?" I don't see why not. Well, why? Because I'm at least 6 months away from graduation. And sure enough, I left her there, and I went a couple of blocks away to where my parents lived, and I found the same situation. They were huddled around the radio looking kind of worried, and my father asked me the same question. I said, "Well, for the same reason, I don't think so. I have a lot of training still to do." But while we were there, a telegram arrived from the Commandant of Cadets in Tuskegee saying, "Cadet Dryden, report back to Tuskegee immediately." So I still had 2 days of leave left on my leave of absence. But next day, of course, I got on a train, returned to Tuskegee. So that's where I was on Pearl Harbor Day. I didn't feel very much connected with it because I was just a trainee. I knew eventually I'd go to war, but there was no immediate threat to me.
Now, how did you get interested in flying?
My dear late departed mother used to tell me that when I was an infant, before I could talk, I used to take bits of paper and tear them into little bits, throw them in the air, and try to say airplane, as described in my book. So it seems that when I first saw the light of day, I had the urge to fly. Some people, I guess, want to be a fireman or a doctor or a cook or a musician. I wanted to fly. So it was from my earliest infancy.
So, and what prompted you to volunteer for the Army Air Corps?
Because it gave me an opportunity to fly.
Okay.
There hadn't been no acceptance of applications from black Americans for Air Corps at the time. And when I read about the Air Corps beginning to accept applications, I rushed down to the recruiting office downtown Manhattan and got an application. I'd done that before, but it had been denied. But now the Army had agreed to accept the applications. As a result, directly, I would say, of Mrs. Roosevelt had visited Tuskegee in October of 1940 to check on a polio treatment center that she'd heard about at the VA hospital in Tuskegee. And while she was there, she saw light airplanes flying around the campus area. And she asked, well, who are flying these airplanes? And she was told, local people. You mean colored people? Why, sure. And she said, but I always heard colored people couldn't fly. And that was a result of a 3-year study that the students, officers, and the faculties at the Army War College had conducted a study 3 years of the performance of black soldiers in World War I. Came to some very ridiculous, bizarre conclusions, the bottom line of which was that Negroes are a subspecies of the human family without the ability, the capability, the psychological setup and so forth of doing anything technical, highly technical, such as flying airplanes or as ground support people, mechanics and armorers and radio people, keeping airplanes flying. So that was a general attitude throughout the country that blacks could not fly. And so she had that idea. Well, when she expressed that opinion, someone told her that, well, Mrs. Roosevelt, we've been flying here for years. And I'll backtrack just a bit to explain that. In 1926, a black man by the name of Charles Alfred Anderson bought an airplane. He was 19 that year, and he couldn't find anybody in this country to teach him to fly. So he solved his problem by teaching himself to fly. And we knew him. He became our chief flight instructor when we were cadets. So he explained to us that when he bought the airplane and could find nobody to teach him, he had a problem. Well, he found out that by turning on the motor of a propeller-driven airplane, up until the time you turn on the motor and get the propeller to turning, it's just an inanimate object, just like this table or chair with no life or character of its own. But when you turn on the motor, the propeller starts to turn and the airplane starts to vibrate ever so slightly. The more power you feed to the engine, which is like stepping on the gas pedal of your car, the faster the propeller goes, and the more airplane vibrates. If you give it full power, which is like floorboarding your car, the propeller going furiously around, the airplane is just waiting to get off the ground. And in fact, if you remove the chocks from under the wheel, the airplane will go down the runway, and it'll take off. So he said, but I wasn't ready to, the airplane was ready to go, but I wasn't. He said it took him about 6 weeks of taxiing it back and forth, getting his confidence up, his feel of the airplane. And one day, about 6 weeks after starting that, he said to himself, shoot, I can fly this thing. He gave it full power. He took off and he taught himself to fly, believe it or not. So here's the man with whom Mrs. Roosevelt, when she was at Tuskegee, said, I want to fly with you. Now, she did, in spite of the objections of the Secret Service entourage that always accompanied the president or his family. And so they flew, landed, and there's a picture of the two of them after landing, both of them a big grin on their face. He, because he'd just been thrilled by flying the First Lady of the land, and she, because she was always a very liberal person, always promoting and supporting minority people, women, blacks, Native Americans, so forth. She was almost against prejudice. And so she had just had exploded the myth that colored people couldn't fly. And when she returned to the White House, more than likely she pulled the president's coattail and probably said something like, Franklin, now look here, I just flew with a black man, very well, very satisfied with him. And you are commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and by the stroke of a pen, you can direct the Army to accept applications from black people. And probably that was said, but I like to add my own little Phillips. She probably also said, and I'm your wife, and you'll do what I say. But at any rate, when the applications were made available to us, and I read about it in the local newspaper, I rushed down to the recruiting station where I'd been about twice before and been denied, and I got the application, submitted it. I was less than 21, so my father had to sign approval. 6 months later, I was called in for a physical exam and an oral questionnaire, if you will, by a board of 3 officers, passed them both, and then I received orders to report to Tuskegee on the 19th of August, 1941. So that's how I got in. There's a roundabout answer, but I had to give it back.
Now, what were you doing before you were accepted? Were you working, or had you been in school?
No, I was a college student. I was in engineering at City College in New York. I really always wanted to be a pilot. So I figured, well, if there are no black pilots in commercial airs or military, the next thing to do is to get into the design of airplanes. So I really wanted a degree in aeronautical engineering. But NYU was the only local university offering that degree, and its tuition was pretty high. My family lived through the Depression. This is back in the 30s, so it was all they could do is to put the 3 of us through school. So instead of being able to go to NYU, I was able to get into City College where the tuition was practically free, but they did not have aeronautical, they had mechanical. So I was not by design, I was in mechanical engineering. Wasn't doing too well at it, as a matter of fact. It turns out that was really not my cup of tea. And my grades reflected it. I'd been a good student up till then, won math prize and all that in junior high school and high school. But then when I got to college, it was more than, I was advanced 1 year before my peers by going through a rapid advancement program, which wasn't a good idea eventually. It was a matter of pride, but as it turned out, I was not mature enough for college. I was at least 1 year behind where it should have been. And the pace at City College was fierce. I mean, there were some brilliant students, mostly Jewish students, who really set a high pace. And I was just in by the skin of my teeth. So along came World War II and saved my face. I was able to say, well, I'm going to fight for my country before they kick me out of college. What happened was that as a result of a tour of Europe by Colonel Charles Lindbergh in the late 30s, when he returned to the States, he reported to the military and to the Congress that he had observed that Germany was arming surreptitiously. They weren't supposed to arm after the Versailles Treaty in World War I, but Hitler and his gang were secretly arming the Hitler Youth, and they were training a lot of aviators. And so when they decided to come out from the closet in open warfare, they just changed their civilian-trained pilots into the Luftwaffe, and they had an instant fighting force, a very potent one by them. So Lindbergh reported that when he came back to the States and gave the alarm that we better start doing something because our armed forces had dwindled down to practically nothing between wars. And so the Congress decided to begin a civilian pilot training program to the early 1940s with units at a number of colleges around the country, including 5 predominantly black colleges: Tuskegee, Howard University in Washington, Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, West Virginia State, and another one, I've forgotten which one, but also at a number of the general college, the white colleges, including City College. So I volunteered for that, was accepted, and got my private pilot's license through that program. So when the Army decided to accept applications and train black, I sort of had a leg up the ladder because I already had a pilot's license. So when I applied, I was enlisted into the second class that went through flight training. We started with 11 and graduated 3, and I think we were the smallest graduating class in the history of the Air Corps. The first class ahead of us started with 13 and graduated 5. And so it went. Every month there was a new class starting, and 8 months later about 1/3 of those who started completed. Until by the time the program ended, now it started on July 1941 with the first class, and every month the class began, and the program closed down in June of 1946. The war was over, so it stopped training. By that time, there were 994 black men who got their wings at Tuskegee, almost 1,000. And by the way, if I ever see either of you on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and you miss that question, I'm going to find you because you owe me $500,000. I just gave you the answer. But that's how come I got into the military.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the training at Tuskegee. Maybe go through a typical day. I mean, I know no 2 days were the same, but kind of give us an idea of what the training was like. Well,
in the primary phase, the first of 3 phases, was conducted at a field that still exists today. It's called Moton, M-O-T-O-N field, about 10 miles away from the Tuskegee University campus. It was named after the man who succeeded Booker T. Washington, who founded Tuskegee back in 1861, I think it was. So Moton Field is still in business. At that time, Moton Field was just open meadow. It didn't have any runways or anything. Even today, it only has one. But as a sort of a footnote, 2 or 3 years ago, Congress passed legislation appropriating $29.1 million to bring Moton Field up to speed as a tourist attraction under the aegis of the Park Service, the National Park Service. So that's where we started our training. And that's where Chief Anderson, along with a couple other black instructors, were the instructors for the first class and my class. The number of instructors began to increase eventually. By the end of the war. There were about 30 black men who were instructing in that program. And there were a couple of white instructors too. But now, so the typical day at the beginning of the program, the first class ahead of us, they had ground school. They had flying in the morning and ground school classes in aerodynamics and weather and Morse code and things like that in the afternoon. At afternoon, the schedule flip-flopped. And whereas we had been at ground school in the morning, we had fly in the afternoon, we had ground school in the morning, and then it went the other way. And that went on until the program with the primary phase ended. At that point, we were transferred from Moton Field, and up to that point, we had been living in the barracks on the campus of Tuskegee. In fact, we cadets were in a converted enclosed bathhouse. They'd covered the pool area, and that's where the first 3 classes had bunk bed, double deckers, and all that sort of thing. While the main base was being built about 11 miles from campus. That base was built for about $1 million. They built the base. Now that, today, that's you win that on a program. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? But in those days, it was a lot of money, and it took about a year for the base to be completed. So when we were transferred there were no barracks. So we lived in Tent City. We lived in these 4 men to a tent with a sort of a canvas top and a little coal burner in the middle of the tent. Some nights like last night in Berman there when the temperature was down in the 20s, it was freezing. But anyway, that was our life. And as we were going to ground schools on that new base that was being built, there were all kinds of construction machines that we had to dodge them as they went lumbering by, and they were cutting deep furrows in mud, and all over the base. But eventually, the barracks were built, the facilities on the flight line, the hangar and all those things, the tower and all were built. And it became one of the most beautiful bases in the Air Force. It was really symmetrically designed, and we were very proud of it. When the war ended, it was closed down, and the Army allowed it to go to weeds, and which is a tragedy, because I kind of think that because it had been believed at the outset that we couldn't fly, we thought that we were being programmed to fail. They said, okay, you're bothering us, send us the best you have, and we'll try to train them. We don't think it's possible, but we'll try. So they started the program. To fast forward to the end of the war, the record we had was unmatched by any other outfit. We had a perfect record in terms of escorting bombers to target and back home. We never lost one, never. And no other outfit can met that record, which led eventually to President Truman desegregating the armed forces. But I'm getting way ahead of the story. Our days on base, the main base, where we did the basic phase of about 10 weeks, and when we finished that, we did the advanced phase for about 10 weeks. It was a very similar thing. You'd have ground school in one part of the day and flying in the other part of the day with the other class, our upperclassmen. And then the third class came along, so they did quite a bit of switching around. So each group was flying the aircraft in which it was then being trained, so that the other classes could go on and do their training and so forth. And eventually, there were classes that were as many as 75 started, and about 1/3 of each class finished. There was definitely a quota system operating. And the ground schools consisted of the subjects I mentioned. As we went further along and our training became more sophisticated, navigation training was added, formation flying in the advanced phase, night flying, gunnery, and all that sort of thing. So by the time the 8-month program ended, we were well-rounded aviators, military aviators. And that roughly is how it went.
What plane did you train on?
The first was a biplane called the PT-17, P for primary attainment, PT-17. It was a biplane, 2 wings, open cockpit. Communications, there was none with the ground, but there was communication between the instructor in the front cockpit and the student in the back through a so-called, I've forgotten, some kind of tube. He was speaking to a tube, and there was a hollow tube went to the back where you had it attached to your headset. So whatever instructions the instructor wanted to give you, he just hollered into the tube and you responded. As I said, there was no communication with the ground, no radio. And when you finished primary, then you went into basic. And the airplane in the primary had about 150 horsepower engine. When you moved to to basic, you were in a BT, a low-wing monoplane, one wing, with a sliding canopy. So you weren't out in the open air like you were in the primary airplane. It was a closed canopy with a heated cockpit. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't do well. But advanced Added to the complexity was the fact that you had a 400 horsepower engine, which was more than twice the power of the primary airplane. You had a closed canopy, still had fixed landing gear. You had a variable pitch propeller, so that from the cockpit activating certain controls, you change the pitch of the propeller, just like in a boat. No, not quite like in a boat, but anyway, for takeoff and landings, when you needed all the power, the pitch of the propeller was changed hydraulically, so it would get a deeper bite as each time the propeller went around on takeoff and landing. When you got up to cruise, you changed the pitch of the propeller so that it didn't have to take such a big bite. Okay. Then when you finish there, we advanced to the advanced phase, and that was an AT-6, an advanced trainer, called popularly the Texan. The Navy trained in that same type airplane. They call it the SNJ, and they were all painted yellow, so they used to call them the Yellow Perils. If you went down to Pensacola, the sky was full of the yellow Perils. The airplane had a 600 horsepower engine. It had retractable landing gear, which was a new feature, and it was in that phase that we learned night flying, instrument flying. We went to gunnery at a base in Florida, Eglin Field, where we learned our gunnery, aerial gunnery, ground gunnery. And when you finish that one, if you passed all your ground school subjects and all your aerial maneuvers, and we learned acrobatics and so forth, then you were licensed as a pilot, and you had your wings pinned on and so forth. So that, in a nutshell, is how the program went.
Now, when you had finished your training at Tuskegee, when were you assigned to your squadron, and what rank did you have when you left Tuskegee?
Okay. When we graduated, we were commissioned as second lieutenants. We were assigned to squadrons immediately. I was happy that my two classmates and I were all assigned to the 99 Fighter Squadron, which was quite celebrated even then. We hadn't done anything. We were just the first blacks as military pilots, and there was a whole lot of hype in the black press. I mean, the white press paid us practically no attention except for complaining that it was a waste of the nation's resources and they couldn't fly, why wasted, training and all the rest of it. So we had a reputation to earn, but among the first classes that graduated, in the first class of graduates, 5 graduates, 3 of them were assigned to the 99 Fighter Squadron to go overseas as a fighter outfit, and the other 2 men were assigned to the what eventually became the 332nd Fighter Group, which would ultimately have 3 squadrons, which turned out eventually to be the 301st, the 302nd, and the 100th, the 301st, and the 302nd Fighter Squadron, all together made up the 332nd Fighter Group, which overseas painted the tails of their airplane, their P-51s, red, and became known as the Red Tails. Those of us assigned to the 99th Fighter Squadron, which was the first one that went overseas, were 3 of the first class, including then Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who was a West Point graduate. And he and 2 of his classmates were assigned to the 99th. My class came along, 3 of us, and all 3 of us, I was happy to say, we were all assigned to 99. As the classes came out, the 3rd class, 4 graduated, and Rayford was in the 99th, Knox was in the 332nd, DeBow was in the 332nd, and Roberts was in the 99. So of the that's the 3rd. Anyway, by the time The first class graduated and got their wings in March of 1942. My class was April and so forth. By September of 1942, we had enough graduates assigned to the 99th to make up a fighter squadron, 28 pilots. So we were ready to go overseas by October. We didn't have orders to go overseas until we left Tuskegee on April 2nd, 1943, and went overseas. About 5 months later, the 332nd went overseas, and after they'd been overseas about 5 months, they picked up the 99th, which by that time had a year's experience as veterans, and the 332nd became a 4-squadron fighter group, which is unusual. There were none others like that. But that was how, from training, we were commissioned as second lieutenants, and we were assigned to fighting units.
Now, a couple of questions. Number one, what became of the washouts?
That's a sad story for the washouts because, well, what happened to them? In most cases, they became enlisted men and were trained as mechanics or parachute riggers or radio men or armorers, ordnance people just handling the ammunition. Some became administrative clerks and so forth. And I say it's a sad story because I'll have to use my imagination since I was not washed out, but I imagine how I would have felt if I had left New York with a whole lot of hype in the neighborhood. You know, Charlie Dryden's going to be a pilot. I don't believe he can make it, you know. Who, him? Probably no. Because I've been building models all my life and talking, flying, and at that time, it was as unlikely and not implausible. It was not imaginable that a black person could be a pilot, much less a military pilot. It might have been as implausible as a black person being president of the United States. So after having been accepted for training, and of course I'd been through the civilian pilot training, so the neighborhood knew that I was a pilot anyway. I'd been trained as a pilot, so they gave me the likelihood or the possibility of making it in the military. But there was a lot of dubious people in the neighborhood. Okay, so going to Tuskegee and coming back after completing a training as a licensed pilot with the wings and everything, then the doubts had disappeared. Next was, how would we do in combat? You know, one thing to fly an airplane, it's another to fly against an enemy who's determined to kill you, to shoot you down. And quite frankly, this is like a footnote almost. I had deep within myself a fear, something like the fear that President Roosevelt spoke about after Pearl Harbor when he had a fireside chat on the radio to his fellow Americans. And he said, because we were in shock, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, America just went into a state of shock. We never believed that, number one, we could be attacked by nations across the Atlantic one side and the Pacific. We just thought the oceans were a perfect buffer, not realizing that air power was in its infancy and would be able eventually to cross oceans, continents, and so forth. So when that happened, America went into shock. President Roosevelt addressed the nation, trying to stiffen our backbone, saying, Americans, fellow Americans, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Well, I had a little feeling inside myself in terms of how will I react the first time I see an enemy aircraft with his guns blazing, firing at me with intent to kill me. He doesn't know me, I don't know him, and he's trying to shoot me down and kill me. Will I be inclined to run away from him? Will I turn coward and chicken and so forth? You don't know until you face it. You imagine I'll be as much a tiger as anybody else, but you don't know whether you're going to be a pussycat. It wasn't until the first time and I happened to be leading a flight of 6 the first time we encountered the enemy in the air. And I saw the airplane with a big black swastika on it, and they were turning into us, and their guns were fired, and there were 6 of us. None of us had shot down the enemy at first. We're brand new, babes in the wood. And every one of us had the motivation, the desire to be the first black American to shoot down one of those SOBs, okay, whose philosophy were, you know, the Aryan supremacy were better than the whole world, and certainly better than black people. And every one of us had a burning desire to be the first, because we knew we'd be historically heroes from then on. So we scattered after them, not away from them, and my fears were laid to rest. I was a tiger, and I knew I was a tiger. But those are some of the reactions as we were overseas.
Now, where was that first engagement, and when?
It was June 9th, 1943, over Pantelleria. It's an island off of Sicily, and it's spelled Pantelleria, pronounced Pantelleria. And when we used to refer to raids over the island, we call them panty raids. And it's interesting about Pantelleria because it's the first time in military history that a ground target surrendered purely to air power. There were no ground troops, no amphibious invasion, nothing of that. They were just bombed in, we bombed the hell out of them for about 2 weeks. Not just us, airplanes of all kinds, bombers, medium bombers, high bombers, fighter bombers, and eventually one day they waved the white flag. They surrendered, camarade, camarade. They had enough. And that's when air power, well, before then, air power, the power of air power, the potential of air power was proven by the Germans with their blitzkrieg, where they bombed Poland and France and brought those people to their knees, and almost brought Britain to its knees, except for the very gallant and heroic RAF. But that's the first time, and of course, our part in the bombing of Pantelleria was very much part of it. My first mission was not in the air against airplanes, it was air-ground, because that's what the 99th was mostly involved in, hitting targets on the ground. And my very first mission was a dive-bombing mission on Pantelleria. And as I rolled into the attack, aiming at my target, I was fascinated and almost mesmerized by shooting at this ground target. This is for real. And then I saw little red streaks going by my cockpit. These were traces. I'd been shot at from the ground. I couldn't really believe that from that river of bullets that we were flying into, how could they possibly miss us? I expected any minute one of them would hit my airplane, I'd go up in flames. But you didn't think about that until after you pull up off the target. I said, oh my God, they could have shot me down.
Yeah. What were you flying? What kind of plane?
P-40s.
P-40.
P-40. This airplane right here. It was a good air-ground attacker, but it wasn't very good in the air against the German aircraft. From the time we entered combat in June of 1943 until the Anzio beachhead in the beginning of 1944 in Italy, we only had one victory. One of our guys shot down a Focke-Wulf 190 on a patrol mission. And we didn't have any other victories until several months later. But over Anzio, the Germans came down to our level. Before then, they'd been staying up pretty high, so we didn't have a chance to engage them. But when we were attacking not their homeland, but they had bases in Sicily, Then they had to come down to our level to protect their ground troops and so forth. And then the guys had an opportunity such that within a couple of days they shot down 17 airplanes.
Wow.
So they turned the tide, and it was then that the military brass began to acknowledge, well, I guess they can shoot and fly and fight. And from that, and now, it wasn't until about 3 months after the 332nd had gone overseas that the Air Corps brass decided that they needed to expand the fighter escort units because our bombers were taking some horrendous losses because they didn't have enough escorts to take them all the way to the target and all the way back home. So the 99th was no, not the 99th. The 332nd, the 3 Squadron, the 100th, 301st, 302nd, were transferred from what they had been flying, P-39s, on coastal patrol. They were transferred into P-47 as escort fighters, which is very good airplane high up, but down low it's not too good to defend itself. Great on air ground. Well, the P-47s remained the escort airplane for about 1 month, and then it was decided by the high brass that the P-47 did not have enough range to go all the way with the bombers to targets and bring them all the way back home. So then the guys were transferred from the P-47 into the P-51 Mustang, which was the Cadillac of fighters at the time, better than anything the Germans had up until the end of the war when they designed and put into action their jets, their twin jets. But the P-51s were excellent airplanes for all roles, air-to-air combat, air-to-ground attacks, escort, and all that sort of thing. So it was when the guys got into the P-51s that they really began to shoot down airplanes. One guy shot down 3 airplanes in 5 minutes. One guy sank a destroyer with machine gun fire, and that's in the movie. If you've seen the HBO movie Tuskegee Airman, you see the actual gun camera film from the airplane of Gwen Pearson on an actual mission. You see him firing at the destroyer, and you see the destroyer going. That was machine gun fire. One of our guys became an ace over the period of the war with 5 confirmed victories. He was in Birmingham yesterday. One of the guys was one of 3 who, on the mission to Berlin, right near the end of the war, about a week or 2 before the war in Germany ended in May of 1945, that day, 8 German jets were shot down by American pilots, and 3 of the 8 were Tuskegee Airmen.
Really?
Now, 2 of those 3 have died, Earl Lane from Cleveland and Charles Brantley from St. Louis. But Dr. Roscoe Brown, who later became president of Bronx Community College, he's still living, and he was in Birmingham yesterday. He shot down a German jet.
Wow. Now, where was your base that you were flying out of?
In Italy, Ramitelli is the main base. R-A-M-I-T-E-L-L-I, Ramitelli, south of Rome, I think. I was back in the States, so I was back in the States as a combat tactics instructor, along with 7 other guys who had been sent back to the States before the 332nd left the States. They left from Selfridgefield, Michigan on Christmas Eve of 1943 and went overseas. Before they left, 8 of us had been sent back from the 99th to be combat tactics instructors, to teach the guys coming out of Tuskegee every month, a new class graduate with brand new wings and no combat experience. So to pass on to them what we had learned in fighting the Germans for the 5 months we'd been overseas, we were sent back for that purpose. Getting a little bit ahead of the story, the 8 of us ended up first at Selfridge Field, Michigan, where we tried to integrate the officers club, and we were told to stay out of the building, not to go in there. Well, the strategy that we guys adopted was this: that after the supper meal, we would go to the evening movie. And after the movie was over, about 8 o'clock, we would go to the club in random groups, 3, 2, 1, 5, so it would look spontaneous, and try to use the club. A lot of guys said, oh yeah, they can't do that to us, and so forth. But when the deal went down, there were only 3 guys that were going into the club. I happened to be on leave that day. They tried to do it the first time on New Year's Day. The war was over, so there were no such thing as holidays. And I was on leave with my new bride, who was a nurse at Tuskegee, whom I met the night that we left Tuskegee, went overseas. Yeah, it was one of those, where have you been all my life? We fell in love when I came back and we got married. But anyway, we were married when I came back on November 16th. Okay, so we were having our first Christmas leave together. She was a nurse at Tuskegee when the guy decided to do this. So on New Year's Eve, she returned to duty at Tuskegee, and I returned to duty the next day. Well, when I returned to duty, the guy told me what had happened. And so I said, well, I'm in it with you, The morning of the 1st, the Lieutenant Colonel Charles Gale, who was commander of the training unit, where the guys were being trained, he was a white officer. He saw me in the flight line, in the operations building, in the locker room. And he said, I was the first lieutenant, and because I had been in the first class, I was sort of senior ranking among all the guys at Selfridge Field. So he said to me, Lieutenant Dryden, welcome back from your leave. How was it? And I said, I had a good time. I said, how was yours? He said, okay until last night. Well, the guys had told me, but I played dumb. I like I hadn't heard anything. I said, what happened last night, Colonel? And he told me about how the 3 guys had gone to the club. They encountered the base commander, Colonel Boyd, and the same Lieutenant Colonel Gale at the entrance to the club. And the base commander told them, this club is for whites only and not to come in there. You have a club in the barracks, which was a bar and a billiard pool table. So he said, do you understand? And they said, yes, we do. And now you have to leave the club. So is that a direct order? They said, yes, so they left the club. Because you see, we all knew that if you disobey an order of a superior officer, in peacetime, you're flirting with a long jail sentence. In wartime, it's treason, for which you could be shot to death by firing squad. And they knew that. So when they were ordered out of the building, they left. But that wasn't the end of the story. The next night, another group was going to do it, and I said, I'm going to go with them. Well, when we left the movie to go to the club, I looked around. There was one guy on my left and one on my right, and that's it, just the 3 of us. So my training squad commander, Colonel Gale, had discussed this with me that morning on the flight line, and he said, you understand, I want you to understand that as the senior ranking officer among the black officers on this base, I expect for you to set the example. You understand? I said, yes, I do. And I was churning on the inside all day, all that afternoon. I just couldn't. I was nervous about what we were about to do, but I was determined, to join the bunch. So that night after the movie, the 3 of us were approaching the club. We went in the entrance, and who do I run into? Colonel Gale. He turned the color of my sweater. He turned beet red. Damn it, Dryden, I thought you said you understood. I said, Colonel, I understand what you said, but I don't agree with it. Why that? He said, we were all guardhouse lawyers, and we had boned up on the regulation. And there was an Army Regulation 210-10, paragraph 19C, that specified that any officer assigned to a base is not only privileged to use the officers' club, but obligated to support the club with his dues, his presence, and his participation. So there's the officers' club, we're officers. There's the Army Regulations, so we're being regulated. Damn it, I'm telling you to get out of the club right now. Is that a direct order? So yes, it is. So we left. Well, every night the same thing happened for about 5 nights. So finally, out of frustration, the base commander closed the club to everybody, black and white alike. So we thought that we had won a victory. Only thing is that at 1st Air Force Headquarters, based in Mitchell Field, New York, Major General, 2 stars, Major General, he looked like Jerry Colonna. He had a big mustache. Oh, what is it? It'll come to me. He caused the whole training unit to be transferred from Selfridgefield, Michigan, outside of Detroit, to Walterboro Air Force Base, 50 miles west of Charleston, in the Deep South. We were transported there by train, a sealed train, and we ended up there after an overnight trip from Selfridge up through Canada, then down through the state of New York, the Mohawk Valley, down to Washington, D.C., all the way down to South Carolina. And when the train came to a stop out in the boondocks, we didn't see any buildings or anything. We thought maybe we were being interned the way the Japanese Americans had been out in California. There were about every 100 yards, there was an armed guard with carbine and so forth. So we thought we were being interned. But we got off the train and found out that the training is supposed to be resumed at Walterboro, our Army base. Well, on that base, there were German prisoners of war who could do things we couldn't do. At the base theater, they could sit anywhere they pleased, and we had to sit in the segregated colored section. At the base PX, they could go into the building to the cab. We couldn't go in the building. It was off limits to us. We're not considered. These are enemy. I'm getting way ahead of my story. Maybe I better wait for you to ask.
That's fine. No, let's go ahead.
I became so outraged and so enraged and so programmed that even today, as I relate this to you, I feel like Pavlov's dog, where you learn with the ringing of the bell, and the dog, after a while, you don't feed him, you ring the bell and he starts to slobber. Well, when I think about how I felt, contemplating how our country treated us, and we had just been defeating. We lost 2 of our pilots. Honoring and respecting the enemy more than we were respected, I lost it. I absolutely lost all discipline, self-control, and I decided these rednecks don't think we can fly, so I'm going to have to show them. So on a Saturday, I led a flight of 3 guys flying P-39s across the base, buzzing real low, the way you do it in combat. The idea being, when you come back from a combat mission, you possibly are low on fuel, you may be out of ammunition, you might be beat from dogfights, just physically tired. So the idea is to get your flight on the ground as quickly as you can and not fly square pattern, because for them it would be like shooting fish in a barrel. So the thing is, you come in very low, you peel off, and the ideal is to, by the time the number 1 man is at the end of the runway, to turn off, the number 4 man is touching down. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So ostensibly, that's what I was training the guys to do. But Inside, I was just making a statement, if you will. Come next day, Sunday, I still was full of venom and anger. So I decided to demonstrate attack on a water tower, a flak tower. You see, the Germans love to put machine guns around the perimeter of water towers, because then if you tried to attack something in a town, as you come in, they'd be able to fire on you as you were coming in. So the thing to do is to knock out flak towers. Flak standing for German word Fliegerabwehrkanone, meaning anti-aircraft. Okay. So I was demonstrating this using the water tower in the middle of Walterboro, South Carolina. I was still there. I went and visited the other day. Demonstrating how you come in low, and if the tower is right here, you come in low, and then you pull up in time to fire at it, and after you fire, you get back on the deck low, and you go doing what the British describe as jinking. In other words, you don't fly straight and level. You're changing altitude and so forth. So if somebody on the ground is getting a bead on you, you're constantly changing altitude and direction. That's what they call jinking. All right, well, both of those actions on Saturday and Sunday were against regulations, and I was grounded, and I was general court-martial. The first trial, I was, this is the content of this. You haven't read this book yet. You have. It'll take you 30 seconds to read it, but I won't, you might want to take a look at it, see how short it is physically. I can recite the words for the purpose of the tape. The name of the title of the chapter, Dismissed, and it reads as follows. The accused will rise and face the court. Does the accused have anything to say before sentence is pronounced? No, sir. Having found First Lieutenant Charles Walter Dryden, serial number blah, 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 guilty as charged of violating the 96th Article of War, which is like a catch-all. If they can't get you for anything else, they get you for that. This General Court-Martial sentences Lieutenant Dryden to be dismissed from the United States Army Air Corps, and that's the end of the chapter. Well, what did dismissal mean? It meant a dishonorable discharge. That's what it meant. You wouldn't be able to hold a federal job and all that, disgrace, all that sort of thing. Well, that was the sentence. The reason that, there were two counts. One was buzzing the base on Saturday and buzzing the town on Sunday. I was acquitted of buzzing the town because I came up with a big fat lie, which the court was somehow or other didn't recognize the truth of that lie, and they acquitted me. But on the charge of buzzing the town on Saturday, there was no way I could be acquitted because the control tower operator, when he was on the witness stand under oath, he was asked how low, excuse me, was Lieutenant Dryden's flight when they crossed the base. He said, "Sir, the tower is 75 feet above the ground," and I had to look down at them as they went by. So we were, all four of us, pretty low. And so I was convicted. I was sentenced to be dismissed from the service. Fortunately for me, pardon me, there had been a legal technicality in the first trial. I had been forced to use my one peremptory challenge to get rid of a member of the court who had been heard to say before the trial, "Dryden is guilty as hell and we're going to throw the book at him." Well, that's certainly not an unprejudiced opinion for somebody to go in who's going to find you, hold you innocent until proven guilty. He had me a judge already. And so, pardon me, I tried to use a challenge for cause, meaning I would have to indicate why do you want to challenge this man off the court. And my reason was because he had been heard to express a prejudged opinion. Well, the lawyer on the court, there's only one legal a lawyer on general court martial. Everybody else is just a run-of-the-mill officer. But the lawyer acts as a judge, and he rules on the validity of certain things, such as whether a cause given for a challenge is valid. They call him the trial judge advocate. The TJA in my court decided that my reason for wanting to challenge this captain was hearsay, and therefore could not be held valid. He had to go. I had to get that man off the court because he'd made up his mind before he'd heard the evidence. So I was forced to use the one. Every defendant has one peremptory challenge for which you don't have to have it. I just want you off the court. I don't have to say I like your looks, I don't like the way you sound, I hate your guts, whatever. I want you off the court. You got to go. Well, I was forced to use that one challenge to get rid of this captain. The higher reviewing authorities, noting that in the proceedings of the trial, felt that as a defendant, my rights had been infringed, so they granted me a second trial. Totally different officer, none of whom